Welcome to Opinion Journal Live from the Wall Street Journal's headquarters in New York City. We've got a great show coming up for you today. First, we'll preview Super Tuesday, the primary races, and tell you what is at stake for Mitt Romney and his many challengers. Plus, we'll go live to Moscow for a post-election update from there, talk about the Obama administration, talking tough on Iran, and much more. I'm Mary Kissel with the Wall Street Journal editorial board. First on the show today, I'd like to welcome Wall Street Journal editorial page editor Paul Gigot.
Hey, Mary. Nice to be here.
Great to be with. Thanks for being with us. So we got Super Tuesday coming up tomorrow. We are a business and financial newspaper. We're all about numbers. So first, let's talk a little bit about the numbers. We've got 10 states, 419 delegates up for grabs, but the candidates need over 1,000. I think 1,144 to win.
Right.
Now, just by those numbers, no one candidate can clinch the nomination tomorrow.
Well, that's for sure. Not even come close.
So why does Super Tuesday matter?
Well, it matters a lot because a lot's at stake for Rick Santorum in particular. Having lost Michigan, he needs to win Ohio, I think, to be able to say, look, I can still remain a real viable challenger to Mitt Romney. If Mitt Romney wins Ohio, along with the other states, he's likely to win. We know he's going to win. He's going to win in Virginia because nobody else on the ballot other than Ron Paul. His home state, he's going to win in Massachusetts. He's likely to win the Idaho caucuses. He's likely to win the Vermont. He's likely to win a couple of other states. So Ohio is crucial for Santorum to be able to say, look, my main sales pitch here is I can win blue-collar voters. I can win evangelical Christians in this culturally conservative state that is Ohio, bellwether state. If he loses there, I think it really hurts him.
Well, I think we've actually got some numbers here that we can put up on Ohio from Real Clear Politics. It shows a pretty even race.
Very close. I don't think anybody...
Very close race. But it wasn't always a close race. I think you've seen Romney really close the gap here on Santorum in the last couple of days. What has changed? Did he get a boost from the Michigan and Arizona primaries, or was something else going on?
No, I think that's what's happened. That's been a big part of it. He got a big boost in Michigan, and with the double play, he won 2. Okay, Santorum had hoped to win, and even though it was narrow, his defeat, Santorum's in Michigan, all the headlines said he lost. Okay, the other thing that's been happening is money. Romney still has the more organization. He has more money to put into it. He's outspending Santorum in this state as he has in so many. So that's been a big advantage too, and it has closed. You'd have to say the momentum right now is for Romney, but Santorum could still pull this out.
We're talking to Wall Street Journal editorial page editor Paul Gigot on Super Tuesday. Paul, we're talking about states. We started out with states where Romney is either polling close to the lead or has a clear advantage, like his home state of Massachusetts, or rather where he was governor, not his home state. He was in Michigan. But how about a state like Tennessee, where we're seeing, and again, if we can put up the numbers here, an even race. But here we have Santorum still in the lead. Is that likely to continue, or do you think that momentum could take over in Tennessee?
I expect Santorum to win Oklahoma, and you would think he would win Tennessee, which is a conservative state, where he had been ahead by bigger numbers. Again, though, we've seen Romney rise, and Romney is closer in Tennessee. And if he could beat Santorum in Tennessee, wow, that would really be a blow to Santorum. So, and that's been the trend. I mean, Romney has been catching up. Again, it's money and momentum. Also, I think probably a third M message. Romney's economic message is getting better. For a while there, you know, he had the 59-point plan, and I'm a businessman, and look at my biography. I know because I created jobs, I can do it in politics too. And inadequate for a lot of people. But he's, with his tax plan, 20% tax cut across the board, new messaging. Now he's a tax reformer. He's giving something larger than Mitt as a message. He's making his campaign more of a cause. I think that's making some Republicans feel better about him and say, okay, I can reconcile myself to Romney, whatever my doubts are.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about the swing states, but also about the South and how important it is for the Republicans to win in the South.
Well, they'll win in the South in November for sure.
Okay, but Georgia, it looks like it's going to be a Gingrich victory. Again, I think we've got some numbers here. If I just go to my notes, Gingrich about 42%, Romney running at about 24%. That's a pretty big gap there.
I would expect Gingrich to win Georgia.
Does it matter?
It matters in the sense that it keeps him in the race. I mean, if he lost Georgia, then I would think he'd have to leave. So Gingrich can say, look, I want another state. And if Santorum in particular doesn't win more than 1 or 2 states, then he can say, I have as much claim as Santorum to stay in as the anti-Romney candidate. So it does matter in that sense. And I think Santorum said, maybe it was yesterday or today, look, if Gingrich would leave the race, then I would beat Romney. But if Gingrich wins Georgia, he won't leave, I don't think.
Right. Now, we had a couple big endorsements over the weekend. Senator Tom Coburn, House Majority Leader Eric Cantor.
Right.
Do these endorsements matter? Do they really give Mitt Romney a boost, or is this just sort of headline grabbing but not that important?
I don't think they matter that much, but they matter in the sense that they add to what I would say is this sense that the Republican establishment and the conservative establishment, or parts of it, are kind of reconciling themselves to Romney and saying, okay, maybe wasn't my first choice, maybe wasn't my second choice to get in to be the nominee, maybe wasn't my third choice, but of all the people in the field, he's got the best chance to beat Obama. And so they're slowly but surely kind of coming around and saying, you know, we got to run with the guys we got, and this is the best of the lot.
I see. We've got less than a minute left, so for viewers who might just be joining us, watching Super Tuesday tomorrow, is Ohio really the state to watch?
I think it's the most important one, yeah. I mean, I'd look in Tennessee to see if Romney can somehow win there, but Ohio is the key state. It's key because it's a bellwether nationally. Republicans have to win it in November if they're going to beat Obama. It's also a place where some of the demographics are better for Santorum than they were in Michigan. You have more evangelicals as a share of the primary electorate, almost certainly. You also have more downscale economically voters, fewer who make under $100,000, fewer who attended college. That's where, if you look at the exit polling in some of the other races, that's where Santorum's been beating Romney. If somehow, with those advantages, Romney can still beat Santorum, with those disadvantages, Romney can still beat Santorum in Ohio, it really is going to give a big boost to Romney going forward.
Great. Well, that's a great place to leave it. Paul Gigot, editor of the Wall Street Journal editorial page, thanks for being with us.
Great to be here, Mary.
We're going to go to a short commercial break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Opinion Journal Live from the Wall Street Journal headquarters in New York. Next up on this segment, we have 2 guests with us. We have Wall Street Journal editorial board member Matt Kaminsky and American Enterprise Institute scholar Leon Ayer on Russia's fraudulent elections. But first, I think we're going to go to Matt in Moscow, who is live with us and joining us by telephone. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Mary. It's good to be here.
Now, Matt, Sunday's presidential election was absolutely rife with fraud, and Mr. Putin was reelected for another 6-year term. But today, the opposition held rallies and protests. How did the Putin regime react?
Well, they had a protest today in the evening around 7 p.m. on Pushkin Square, which is just about, I guess, half a mile from the Kremlin. And they got about 40,000 demonstrators out, which was not a bad figure considering it was a weeknight work day. And they had a fairly peaceful protest. I was there for the first 2 hours, but it was essentially ringed with Russian security forces. And at the end, when most of the demonstrators started to disperse, the police moved in and they arrested about 300 people, including one of the leading protest figures, Alexei Navalny, and a couple others.
Matt,
who tried to occupy the main center of the square.
Matt, was Moscow the only place where we saw protests, or were there protests in some of the other larger cities across Russia today?
In St. Petersburg, I think there were a fewer, a bit smaller in size, and there were fewer arrests there. I mean, I think this is mostly this movement, and it started in December after the parliamentary elections on December 5th, has been driven by Russia's biggest cities, and principally Moscow, although there is discontent throughout the country. But where this is really going to keep happening is Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned Mr. Navalny, who is really the star of the opposition protests. Now, you had an interview with him in Saturday's Wall Street Journal. What can you tell us about his intentions going forward? Or is he going to continue to try to organize? Can he do that if he's just been arrested? What can you tell us?
I mean, he was released apparently tonight. Although he still, I guess it's possible that he could be charged. I mean, he's really raised the stakes here. You know, he's been of all, and this is, I mean, there's a whole, gamut of sort of people who are on that stage every time they have protests here. He has been really the one that's been most outspoken in saying, we really need to escalate here against the Putin regime. We need to kind of keep this going. It was all nice and friendly, the last 3 months, but now we need to think about having perhaps a tent city in the middle of Moscow, about calling for nationwide strikes. That's a very risky strategy because one of the successes of this movement here has been that it's brought out, regular Russians who are not that interested apparently in politics. And by taking a kind of, a harder line, he is taking a risk that he may lose a lot of the people who've been coming out. At the same time, I think he feels that he needs to keep the momentum going. It's going to be very hard because on Sunday, Vladimir Putin looks very confident, saying, we won this thing. Maybe I stole some votes, which he didn't say, of course, but they really did mobilize the Putin vote. And it's also risky for Navalny because it's not clear. I mean, they say they want early presidential elections, they want political opening, but unlike in Ukraine 8 years ago or
Matt, we've got about 10 seconds left.
Year, their demands are not, they don't have that much leverage, and the demands are not that clear. So it's really, we have to see whether he can keep this going in the next coming days.
Great. Matt Kaminsky, Wall Street Journal editorial board member, reporting for us live from Moscow. Matt, thank you for that report, and please stay safe. Next up, we've got American Enterprise Institute scholar Leon Aron, who joins us today via Skype. Leon, welcome.
Glad to be here.
George Bush was really ridiculed for saying that he had looked into Mr. Putin's eyes and seen his soul. What does this election tell us, if anything, about how the Obama administration's Russia reset has worked or not worked?
Well, it certainly has not worked in what I think is the overall greatest strategic goal of the United States, which is to move Russia closer to becoming a normal, democratic, free, and prosperous state. Now, the administration may say that that was never their goal. But my sense is that the reset was more than just a collection of specific actions, arms control, Afghanistan, Iran. It was implied that it was going to be a kind of a sense of rapprochement, that the United States and Russia will sort of get closer, at least on some key values. But clearly, this election has shown that nothing of the kind has happened.
We're talking to Leon Aron, a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington. Leon, today the State Department spokeswoman Victoria Nuland came out and congratulated the Russian people on, quote, the completion of the presidential elections. Although she did note some fraud, overall it was fairly congratulatory. Given your experience and what we've seen with Mr. Putin, is continuing the same kind of diplomatic rhetoric the right approach, or does the Obama administration need to change tack?
I think they should, and I think they will. It's just very difficult to come down from this sort of rhetoric of the reset. But the problem is that the fraud, which took place, definitely is not the most important issue. To Russians, if you both from the interviews and the opinion polls, that's not the worst thing of these elections. The worst thing is that literally not a single prominent, well, forget about prominent, not a single pro-democracy liberal opposition leader has been allowed by Putin to run, A. B, the television where 95% of the Russians go to for their news is totally in the hands of the government. And in these in the run-up to the election, it was made into a completely shamelessly propaganda tool by Putin with absolutely no opposition. So, and finally, one of the protesters' demands was to fire the chairman of the Central Electoral Commission and punish those who were responsible for the fraud in the December 4th parliamentary elections. None of that has been done. So it's not just little instances of frauds here and there. It's just from the very beginning. And again, the public opinion polls and the columns and the Russian internet are bursting with this. From the very beginning, in the eyes of millions of Russians, not just the protesters, this was a badly skewed and therefore illegitimate election.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it at that. American Enterprise Institute scholar Leon Aron, expert on Russia, very important country, and clearly one that will be one to watch in the months and years ahead, particularly if these protests continue. Leon, thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
We're going to take a short commercial break now. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Opinion Journal Live from the Wall Street Journal headquarters in New York City. Joining me on set now, Wall Street Journal assistant features editor David Feith, who joins us to talk about President Obama's hawkish turn on Iran. David, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, for those that might not know, let's just really briefly review the threat. How close is Iran to getting a nuclear device? Is it months away, years away, weeks away? What do you say?
Well, these questions are notoriously hard to answer, and Western intelligence services have had an uneven run at best at answering them. But there is a consensus if you look at various Western capitals, if you look at the International Atomic Energy Agency and elsewhere, that we're now dealing in months, perhaps a year, certainly not years. And one thing that's of particular focus as the U.S. and Israel perhaps go back and forth over this issue is there's really concern that within a matter of just a few months, the Iranians might enter what the Israelis consider a zone of immunity, which is to say a point at which the Iranian program is hardened enough that the Israelis would no longer be able to turn it back with a military attack. That's a point of intense focus.
And we've got a guy running the country who has spoken publicly about wanting to eradicate Israel from the face of the earth. So this is a hugely serious existential threat to Israel. Now, how did the Obama administration initially handle this problem, and what exactly has changed?
Well, coming in 2009, President Obama and his administration seemed to take the approach that what was missing, the reason for the kind of belligerence from Iran that you alluded to, was a lack of American engagement. It was the cowboyism that had dominated American foreign policy in the George W. Bush years, and that what could solve this problem was the extended hand of American engagement to the Iranians. That turned to be something of an abject failure, and over time, as the Iranians remained as bellicose as ever, as the centrifuges continued spinning, even as the Stuxnet virus seemed promising for a moment but didn't paralyze the Iranian nuclear program in any way, the Obama administration shifted and has moved in recent months, over the past year, toward a harder line approach of tougher sanctions and less fanciful talk of engagement.
Now, we had a very important speech on Sunday. There was a lot of tough rhetoric there. Israel, we've got your back. How seriously should we take this very sharp turn in rhetoric now that we're starting to see out of the president and other members of cabinet? Is this just election year rhetoric, or is this really something that you think is signaling a fundamental shift?
That's the $64,000 question.
Okay.
I think that even cynical Iran watchers have noticed that over the past few days the president has shifted, at least rhetorically. So he made very clear, he repeated the line that an Iranian regime with nuclear weapons is unacceptable. He insisted last week that he doesn't bluff. He spoke very clearly. One thing that was of particular interest, he said that containment of a nuclear Iran is not an option. And that's a response to a lot of talk in policy circles that actually, given the costs of taking military action or of having Israel do so against Iran, the U.S. ought to resign itself to something of a containment policy against Iran. The president made fairly clear just a few days ago in the Atlantic magazine that that's not an option, which I think gave a lot of Iran watchers reason to pay some attention. And yet, there's obviously a question of how much a rhetorical shift of a few days matters, especially, as you mentioned, in light of election year exigencies. The president understands that a lot of American voters care a lot about the U.S. posture toward the Iranian threat, and so there's a question as to whether his statements need to be discounted at all, given that.
We're talking to Wall Street Journal assistant features editor David Feith on the Obama administration and Iran. Has the administration, by dint of its rhetoric, to some extent backed itself into a corner that when you say you can't call my bluff, well, when something actually happens, if they did launch an attack, that we now are 100% committed, or is there still wiggle room here in terms of the strategy that they say they're committing to?
This is one of those Zen questions. It's hard to know. One thing, though, in the diplomatic chatter that is interesting is that the president certainly did forcefully say, I'm not a bluffer, a nuclear Iran is unacceptable, but there's a lot of ambiguity there. So, for example, the Israelis are concerned they wouldn't want an Iran either to possess a fully put together nuclear bomb, but neither would they want Iran to possess the capacity to have what's called breakout capacity, to very quickly be able to put a bomb together. There's some question about whether the Americans see it the same way. In other words, are the Americans drawing a sharp line at having a ready-made bomb ready to go? Or do the Americans also, as the Israelis, consider it unacceptable for the Iranians to have breakout capacity? On things like that, the rhetoric has been less clear. And so while there's a certain degree of the president seemingly putting skin in the game and saying, this is unacceptable, it will not happen on my watch, at the same time, various commentators are wondering, especially diplomats, whether there are red lines missing, and they really think the president ought to make some red lines clearer.
We've got less than a minute left, David. Very briefly, there's been a lot of press about the strained relationship between President Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader. Did they, or have we seen any signs of a rapprochement there in their meetings recently, or is that still quite a tense relationship?
We'll see. I think the only assumption is that it remains tense. The meeting today in the Oval Office is thought to be the last time that President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu will have the chance to meet face-to-face before the Israelis supposedly make this fateful call about the zone of immunity and whether to attack. No one thinks everything was resolved tidily this afternoon. Okay.
Well, I guess we'll have to leave it at that. Wall Street Journal assistant features editor David Feith, thank you very much for being with us today. And we'll hope to have you up again soon. Well, last but not least, we have Wall Street Journal Main Street columnist Bill McGurn, who's going to preview his column tomorrow on President Reagan and today's Romney Republicans. Bill?
Hey, Mary, how you doing?
Welcome. Very well, thanks. Last but not least, because this is a very interesting topic. Now, there's been a lot of angst out there about the quality of the Republican candidates for president. Do you think that that's warranted?
Well, to some degree, but what was interesting is I went back to the Washington Post and the New York Times at just about this week in 1980 to see where we were. And the parallels are the same. Everyone was complaining about the quality of the Republican candidates. Gerald Ford came in to say that Ronald Reagan could not win a national election and that he himself was available if people wanted to draft him in the way that some people want to draft Chris Christie or Mitch Daniels or Jeb Bush today. So it's just fascinating to see that the conventional wisdom hasn't changed much.
Well, let's dig into some of those parallels. One of them was the idea that somehow Reagan was a flawed candidate. He had a record as governor of California. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, it wasn't so much that he was flawed, but we tend to look back at Reagan through this prism of his presidency, where he was immensely successful. He brought down the Berlin Wall. He attracted all sorts of Democrats into the party, and he revived the U.S. economy. But all that was in the future then. When he was running, he was a governor who had signed the most liberal abortion law in the country in California, had pushed for and passed the largest tax increase in California state history, and as George H.W. Bush, one of his chief rivals, would point out, had entered office in California with a $4.6 billion state budget and left with a $10.2 billion state budget. So there was a record there. There were gaffes. Just about this time, in early February, Reagan had told an ethnic joke involving Italians and Poles, for which he apologized, and for which, remarkably, the New York Times defended him. So all sorts of things.
Wow, and anything can happen. And, amazing. Well, I'm glad you brought up abortion. I wanted to talk to you about the role of religion in that campaign. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion in this campaign about social conservatives, religious conservatives.
Right.
What can we learn from the early
Well, I
days?
think in those days, in the primaries, it didn't loom quite as large. For one thing, that these evangelicals were new to the process, and they were just kind of forming. Reagan appeared before a group of them in Dallas, I believe, in August, and famously said to them, "I know you can't endorse me, but I endorse you." A very clever use of them. So it was all coming to the stage. Again, you read the Times, you read some of the conventional wisdom. I think it was either Anthony Lewis or Scotty Reston saying they were glad that Reagan was the nominee in the White House, in the Carter White House, because they thought he would be just the man to drive like disaffected labor people and so forth back into the arms of the Democratic Party. And of course, Reagan created a whole new term, Reagan Democrats.
Right. We're talking with the Wall Street Journal columnist, Main Street columnist Bill McGurn. So given all of that, given the historical parallels between the angst about the candidates in 1980 and the angst about the candidates today, what could a Mitt Romney then learn about how to conduct his campaign or how to rise above the criticism today?
Right.
What advice would you give
I would say
him?
the main advice is don't let yourself be limited by the conventional wisdom. Everyone just thought Reagan was too conservative to win, that he couldn't win. The one difference today and then is today Reagan was running, back then Reagan was running against three men who were more liberal or moderate than he was, whereas today Romney's running against three people who profess at least to be more conservative than he is. I'm not sure Reagan would have looked as good if he were trying to distinguish himself from other conservatives. So he had a big advantage on the sort of ideology. But on the other side, just as running, people thought Reagan just couldn't do it, and they were looking for Ford. The Ford thing was a big thing. They talked about a co-presidency at the convention and so forth because people, thought Reagan was scary. And I think he just showed to stick with your platform, make distinctions, and move ahead. I think Governor Romney started to do that with the tax plan. I think he needs to go further on the health care plan. I think Senator Santorum is right that he's kind of handicapped by his Romney care, and that a federalist explanation probably isn't going to cut it.
Bill, is there a risk that you're going a little bit too far with these analogies and that actually there isn't a Ronald Reagan and that we are kind of stuck with the B list of GOP candidates?
But my point was there wasn't a Ronald Reagan in 1980. All the achievements were in the future and so forth. I think you clarify how you get there. Look, Governor Romney's not a movie actor. Is not going to give the kind of speeches that Ronald Reagan is. But there's no need for him to be weighed down by the conventional wisdom that he's too rich, too out of touch, and this. People doubted Reagan's ability to connect for a long, long time. And I think Reagan had his message, didn't back down from his message, and clarified his message. I think Governor Romney, for all the faults that he has, and I'm not endorsing him, but for all the faults that he has, when he comes out of that convention, assuming that he's made his peace with the other candidates, people are going to be enthusiastic about him because this election's a referendum on Barack Obama.
Great. We're going to have to leave it at that. Bill
Okay,
McGurn,
thank you.
Main Street columnist, thanks for being with us. That's it for Opinion Journal Live today. We're back tomorrow and every weekday from 5 to 5:30 Eastern. I'm Mary Kissel with the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Thanks for being with us.